You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 29th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing, in association with Addis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, the European-US trade deal is one of those compromises that leaves many EU nations unhappy. Monocle's Simon Bouvier is in Paris, and Simon, the French reaction has not been pleasant.
That's right, Chris. Prime Minister François Bayrou has called it a dark day and a submission. So we'll be getting into the fallout.
Thank you, Simon. We'll get the German view as well, and we'll have the latest business headlines. We'll have a visit to a Japanese exhibition on pictograms, and we'll get the latest news from Italy with Anita Riotta. Anita.
Yes, we're going to cover everything from a political spat in Rome and then head north to a brand new luxury hotel in La Serenissima.
All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen went out on something of a limb on Sunday when she travelled to Scotland and reached a trade deal with the US President Donald Trump. It's a deal that has now drawn the ire of the European Union's two largest economies, France and Germany. France's Prime Minister called it a dark day, as you just heard, and while Germany's Chancellor suggested he is in favour, German industry is telling a very different story. Well, I'm joined now by Alexis Self, Monocle's foreign editor, right here in the studio, and Simon Bouvier is in our Paris studio. Simon, I'm going to come to you first, perhaps because France has been the most public about this in terms of the government response compared to even Germany. Is this a sign that they did not even agree in advance?
Well, Chris, I think that the strategy on the European Commission side apparently has been a strategy of stalling and then the spontaneous kind of effort to try and close a deal with Trump to get out of a potential trade war. They argue that this kind of 15% baseline tariff with many, many, many exceptions and fine print still to be determined, I should say, was the best possible deal that they could get. But I think one of the reasons that France has been the most vocal in its criticism, and I think we should specify that nobody in Europe is celebrating this new trade barrier. You know, the levels used to be extremely low. This is a new world for everyone, and nobody is happy about it. But there are some who are quietly relieved that the worst has been avoided. But the French, being less exposed than many other countries to exports to the United States and being a lot more invested in on the strategic front on getting the European defense industry up to speed, are especially unhappy about the terms of this deal for now.
Lex, as Simon says there has been a lot of disquiet in Europe. Nobody is happy about this deal, and yet when it comes to Germany, it's been interesting that the Chancellor Friedrich Merz was among those who at least was happy that a deal was reached. He sounded a little more positive. Did he maybe miscalculate on his own business sector's reaction, because they've been far more negative?
Well, I suppose he's reacted to the markets, which have dipped more in Germany than in Paris, for example. He did come out yesterday and say that he had not expected a better deal, and admitting that the German economy will suffer as a result of the agreement reached. I suppose what might have come as a surprise to Merz was the vehemence of the French response and the fact that it's made both the EU look disunited and weak, and at the same time making Paris look strong by comparison for standing up to Trump. Berlin's, I think, been pretty firm, at least rhetorically, on tariffs and Merz since he's come into power for the past few months. And I think, given Germany's reliance compared to, as Simon said, Paris's on exports to the US, I don't think it's a surprise that business has reacted the way it has.
Simon, France perhaps does come out strong out of this by reacting the way that it has. Is it interesting that this was François Bayrou and not Emmanuel Macron? Is he trying to maybe protect his own relationship, sort of chummy relationship with Trump?
I think it's definitely deliberate. There was definitely a conversation about who should say what. And I think there's also a lot of politics going on because there are among the kind of French opposition parties, the whole political class here is up in arms about this. It's not just the government. So they kind of had to say something to the effect of what Bayrou said, so a strongly worded rebuke of it, because the entire political class and much of the population views this as a step back. And then I think also shouldn't forget that even if the agreement has this kind of baseline 15% tariff on everything, a lot of the numbers that were thrown around in the deal are shaky at best. There's this kind of pledge of 750 billion euros of purchases of American hydrocarbons, so liquefied natural gas and petrol. I think many analysts have busted out their calculators and have tried to make sense of this number, and they can't see how the EU is going to be able to triple its imports of American hydrocarbons for 3 years in a row. And also the fact that the Commission is making these commitments when it doesn't really have a clear mechanism to force countries or companies even to act in this way. In fact, many companies argue the European Commission has no business making these commitments on their behalf. I think von der Leyen knows this. She also knows that President Trump is ignorant of how the EU institutions function. So she took a big gamble here, in my view. She's saying, let's throw these numbers at Trump. Let's get the kind of on-camera handshake deal. Let's get the negative reaction also, because von der Leyen is a shrewd politician. You have to think she expected this to go down this way. I think the negative reaction is going to be part of what satisfies Trump in this agreement. So we'll have to see. August 1st is the deadline that they've given themselves to come up with a written statement that will not be legally binding, but will have more specifics about which sectors will be exempted from this 15% baseline, etc. And then the rest of the nitty-gritty will be sorted out. So she's taking a big gamble that he's not going to get upset that these numbers are essentially made up.
It is interesting, Lex, that, as Simon was saying, France's reaction can perhaps afford to be more negative because it doesn't have as much skin in the game as, say, Germany does. And German car makers in particular are the ones that have been speaking out about this. Trump makes this point of saying the deal is fair, stressed that in his press conference with von der Leyen. Nonetheless, there's a 15% tariff on European cars going to the US and a 2.5% tariff on American cars going to Europe. That's not going to go down well.
There's the art of the deal for you there. Just say it's a fair deal. It does appear that the EU has got the rum side of this deal. And frankly, that's because, the US runs a huge trade deficit with the bloc. The EU exports more to the US than it takes in return, which, is aggrieves Trump massively.
Whether there are tariffs or not.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so for that, in that regard, Trump had the bigger bargaining chip of making it more difficult for European companies to access what is for them becoming an increasingly vital US market, especially for German automobile makers, given that China, previously a massive buyer of German cars, has built up its own industry so much in the past few years that German automobiles' share of the Chinese market has fallen massively, even in the past 5 years, meaning the US market has become increasingly significant and putting them in this real position of disadvantage when it comes to negotiating these tariffs. Not that it seems German car makers had much of a say on what came out in the final deal. I think this is definitely not the end of this conversation.
Definitely not the end. There will be more, as Simon says, the August 1st deadline as well. See if anything changes. Simon Bouvier, Monocle's Paris bureau chief, and Alexis Self, Monocle's foreign editor. Thank you both for joining us. And now here's Carlotta Ribello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. The IPC, a global initiative by United Nations agencies, aid groups and governments, has issued an alert saying the worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out in the Gaza Strip. It added that widespread starvation, malnutrition and disease were behind a rise in hunger-related deaths in the enclave. Aid is now making its way into Gaza after the Israeli military agreed to cease operations for 10 hours per day following international pressure. Israel denies accusations of being responsible for food shortages. Colombia's former president Álvaro Uribe has been found guilty of witness tampering and fraud. He becomes the nation's first former leader to be convicted of a crime, with each charge carrying up to 12 years in prison. Uribe was convicted of attempting to bribe witnesses in an investigation looking at alleged ties to the right-wing paramilitaries. He is expected to appeal the verdict. And parents in China are being offered around €430 a year for each child under the age of 3 as an attempt to boost birth rates. This is the government's first nationwide subsidy aimed at tackling the declining birth rate, with the handouts expected to help around 20 million families with the costs of raising children. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. And now it's time for a roundup of other headlines in the business world beyond tariffs. We're going to turn to Ewan Potts, Bloomberg reporter. And Ewan, we're going to start with right here in London. Shareholders of a fintech company, Wise, have voted to move its main stock market listing out of London. That's a pretty big blow for this place, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Hello, Chris. It is one of the world's biggest financial technology companies, worth more than £10 billion. And shareholders in Wise, originally known as TransferWise, have voted to move its primary stock market listing from London to New York. It was a pretty overwhelming margin. More than 85% of shareholders voted for the proposals. Wise argues that moving the primary listing will open up its shares to legions of retail and institutional investors and giving it more liquidity and ultimately, one suspects, a higher valuation. US markets offer vastly deeper pools of trading volume and have delivered greater returns to shareholders than London in recent years. The move really adds to the gloom on London's stock exchange. While the city remains a financial services powerhouse, it's still very much the world's number 2 centre for the broader industry, but its stock market is starting to look like something of an also-ran. When it comes to high growth tech companies in particular, London has really been struggling in recent years. Remember the case of chip designer ARM, based in Cambridge. That's the UK's most valuable tech company. Well, it chose the New York Stock Exchange for its initial listing, didn't even look at London at all. Those high valuations, just too tempting.
Ewan, to maybe flip this, is it interesting that New York remains as much of a hub as it is, despite, all the political stuff that we talk about, including on this program when it comes to tariffs and worries of the stock market? New York's doing pretty well.
Yeah, all of that stuff, all those political concerns, those political risks really haven't affected New York's status as a stock market hub. It almost feels as if the world is kind of moving towards having a sort of unipolar world when it comes to stock markets and stock exchanges, because there was a time not so long ago, we're only talking 10, 15 years ago, when international companies wanting to list abroad, if they're based in a smaller country or somewhere with a weaker stock market, would look to London as the obvious place to go. London attracted loads of international listings. Those days really look like they're behind us now, but it's these high-tech growth companies that are the biggest concerns. The government in the UK talks a lot about increasing growth prospects, and of course financial services hugely important for the UK economy. But when it comes to stock listings, London just can't seem to attract the companies it once used to.
You and one other story you've been following for us, some new data on China's plans to increase coal production of all things.
Yeah, Chris, more than 450 sites are proposed, coal mine sites are proposed in China, with some 40% of those already under development or in test operation. This is data from Global Energy Monitor, which is a US outfit which promotes clean energy. The scale of China's coal ambitions really threatening to overwhelm its climate targets, and indeed global climate targets. The country already accounts for 60% of all proposed mine capacity. And if these proposed mines come into operation, they'll bring total capacity of 1.3 billion tonnes a year. That is more than the total output of Indonesia and Australia, two enormous producers of coal. Now, last year, if you're a coal investor, was a bad year. A good year if you're hoping to see less of the stuff dug out of the ground. It was actually the worst year for new coal production in 10 years. About 100 million tonnes of coal production was added last year. So the world is still producing more and more coal every year, but it was the lowest amount of extra production added last year. But as I say, there is still more being dug out of the ground. The United Nations, for its part, says that coal production needs to fall by 75% in the decade to 2030. Well, we're already halfway through that period, and that target is looking pretty unlikely. And while China is adding a lot of renewables capacity, they're building huge amounts of solar and wind power, they are continuing to add lots and lots of coal.
Ewan, just to quickly follow up on that, I mean, is this a sign that China is kind of taking, I guess, an all-of-the-above approach because it has so many energy needs, and in some ways it has been highlighted as a country that was also boosting renewables, but that's just not enough?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And of course, energy sovereignty is very important for a lot of countries, and particularly for the Chinese Communist Party. And coal is a very easily accessible domestic source of energy. There's plenty of it in China. They can dig it out of the ground very cheaply. So more than 60% of power, the energy supplied in China, comes from burning coal. It's cheap and it's available and it's domestically produced. Now, of course, China is also the world's biggest producer of wind turbines and solar panels. They dominate the production of those as well. But the Chinese government has decided that it cannot solely rely on renewables, and it needs to have coal as its baseload. They're also building nuclear power plants. I mean, China's demand, China's need for electricity is enormous. It has a lot of consumers who are getting gradually wealthier. They're buying more aircon and more power-consuming devices. And of course, it is the world's factory. Whatever tariffs are put in place, China still produces a huge amount of the manufacturers' goods around the world. And all of that requires power. So all that stuff we're buying from China, it needs energy. And the Chinese government has decided it cannot do that without burning coal and burning more coal.
Ewan Potts, Bloomberg reporter, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and we're heading to Italy next for a roundup of news from the Mediterranean nation. And joining me for that is Anita Riota, Monocle's producer of the Foreign Desk and our resident Italian. Good afternoon, Anita.
Good afternoon, Chris. I love resident Italian. What an honor.
I mean, I have to put it in some way.
Yes.
So just to explain, I don't know if I'm always referred to as the resident Austrian when I do an Austria story or not. But, you know, you got to go somewhere. This is short. So we're going to start with some serious stuff, and then we'll get to the less serious stuff, Anita. But there has been a political fight over whether Italy should recognize Palestine.
Yeah, fight really is the right word here. So for some background for our listeners, the Meloni government has come out and said that they are not yet putting a call to recognize, for Rome to recognize a Palestinian state. This comes off of France and the UK signaling that they will do so. The UN right now is meeting in New York to deliberate, what is the future of a two-state solution. So Rome says we are not going to join this new European cohort of states that are looking to recognize a Palestinian state. It's interesting, though, that her reasoning for not doing this is because she's arguing, whether we want to take her at face value is another question, but she is arguing that recognizing a state that does not yet exist might almost be counterproductive. She does say that her aim and her government's aim is to help bring about a two-state solution, and the creation of a Palestinian state. But she's arguing right now that because that state is undefined and does not exist in a sort of international affairs sense at this moment in time, saying that it does is going to complicate actually bringing about that reality. So it's an interesting sort of double stance.
It is interesting, something that has often been maybe the argument for not recognizing a Palestinian state. But at the same time, there are countries that are trying to force the issue. I guess that's what this moment is about. How has this gone down with the opposition?
Terribly. I mean, on one hand, the opposition does seem to consistently seize on anything that she does that deviates from the norm of Europe, because she's enjoying a fairly popular first term. But again, that's a slightly different conversation. Well, again, so as we've said, the opposition is furious. They've called the move a, quote, act of subservience to the criminal Netanyahu. Conte, who was the leader of the Five-Star Movement and also a former Italian prime minister himself, said that she is isolating Italy in Europe and bringing Italy ever closer to the worst America ever, Trump's America. So they have seized on this. They are trying to align her more so with Trump. They're trying to show that she's out of lockstep with their European peers. And the opposition was also joined by Italian diplomats, over 40 Italian diplomats, ranging from former ambassadors to people who had roles in this government until quite recently, have also signed a letter urging her to recognize the Palestinian state and have called the move anything but merely symbolic.
Well, let's move on to some slightly happier news from the world of hospitality, from Venice. What can you tell us?
Yes, so the Orient Express has begun reservations for their Palazzo Hotel in Venice. The hotel will open its doors in April 2026, but for anyone keen to stay in the historic Palazzo, those reservations are now live. It's a historic aristocratic haven. It's on the canals. It's at the confluence of two canals. So you can imagine sort of having your breakfast on their lush terrace. I've seen some renderings of what they're aiming for. It looks like it's going to be glorious. And this comes off the back of the Orient Express opening up its Rome Hotel La Minerva last year, which has been a pretty roaring success. So it's their second property, and it's an interesting foray into a sort of different field for the Orient Express.
Well, our next guests, Nick Manise and Grace Charlton, might have been listening to that, trying to get their way to that Venice hotel sometime soon. But before we let you go, Anita, one other thing. We've been talking about this a little bit on some other shows, that liquids are making a comeback at airports. Mm-hmm. This includes Italy, and I love the way that the Italians are covering this. I have to read this quote you gave me from Italian papers. Grandpa Giovanni's large bottle of Barbaresco and Aunt Carmela's Trapani pesto can finally be brought back in your carry-on. What are you going to bring?
I mean, isn't that really what life's all about? I would bring back, don't underestimate a really amazing olive oil. You get up to 2 liters of liquids now. That's serious business. So I would bring back some olive oil. I'd bring back some wine. I'd go 1 liter, 1 liter.
I always go for wine. That is a very good call. But it's nice also to be able to bring that in a carry-on, isn't it? Because you risk something putting it in your check-in, which I do sometimes do anyway.
Oh, very living life on the edge.
I do live life on the edge. But you need to have your Italian wines, Austrian wines, in my case, resident Austrian, resident Italian.
Yes. So travelers flying out of Turin can now join travelers flying out of Rome, Bologna, Milan, and are able now to take home some treats. So hopefully we have coworkers heading there soon.
Yes, we will look for that. Again, I'll go to my next guests for that. Anita Ryota, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's show, we're going to head to Japan, or Japan House here in London, to be a little more exact. It has a new exhibition about pictograms. It's been visited recently by Monocle's design editor, Nick Manise, and Grace Charlton, Monocle's associate editor for design and fashion. Both of you join me right here in the studio. I don't know when the last time was I had both of you in the studio together.
I think Christmas.
Perhaps, but I also think that the fact that Grace Charlton's job title is a little bit of a mouthful is almost a perfect segue to pictograms.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Maybe I need to get a pictogram to just relate to people that I'm
What would the pictogram look like for design and fashion associate editor? Do you have a
I love this, but
suggestion
before
here?
we dive into that, do we want to sort of set up what a pictogram is?
Oh, you're going to do my job for me here. Okay,
look,
fine. Yes, that was going to be my next question in this list.
Well, maybe let's reverse engineer it. I'm going to start hosting the show from now on. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you on the briefing. So pictograms, these
Yes.
are essentially
What are they?
symbolic representations of complex ideas. Is that a fair way of putting it, Grace?
Exactly, yeah, and it really appeals to sort of the reptilian part of my brain. I think it's just distilling an essence of something into a cute little emoji.
And I think the perfect, or maybe the most iconic examples are those symbols that are used for Olympic sports, Olympic venues. This is perhaps where the Japanese link perhaps comes its strongest, and why this showcase was there is because in many ways the framework, the groundwork for establishing pictograms as a broader cultural thing that transcends countries and nations and language groups was developed or really came to the fore at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, which was the first time that these visuals were used to represent sports. Previously, you just had a list of what the sport was in various languages, English, Italian, Japanese, but finally, for the first time, we had a really clear representation, which, as host of this show now, brings me back to my original question.
I'm just going to take a back seat now.
Grace Charlton, how would you paint the picture for your job in a symbolic representation? And then, Chris, I'll throw to you after this.
I don't know, maybe like a sort of half chair, half dress hybrid. I don't know, something that conveys design and fashion at the same time.
Yeah, I go for that. Chris, your thoughts?
I'm just amazed by, to turn this back to you as the host, what fascinates me about something like pictograms is just how simple it is, right? And that's something that, I wonder for both of you with a design hat on, design doesn't have to be complicated. It's just about coming up with kind of a new, interesting way to show things.
No, exactly. And often just sort of, finding the essence and taking away all the noise is the skill that it really is. Like having that clarity of vision in a way that sort of has universal appeal across languages. When you land in a foreign airport, you know where the exit is because they've got the exit sign and they've got arrows pointing you in different directions. I think that really appeals to me in terms of the design.
But I will say I love by comparison, the US was always focused on just writing it out. They never really got that message that it might help to have some kind of universal sign for people who don't speak English.
Yeah, it's totally, and it's so true, especially if we've got different alphabets,
I think this is a fascinating thing. It's the ability, you look at the US as a particularly divided country along partisan lines, red and blue, and you wonder if maybe they were all just communicating in beautiful symbols that transcend cultures, politics. Is that not the most beautiful thing that we could do? Maybe if the US relied on pictograms.
Yeah, if they just communicated in emojis or hieroglyphs.
Yeah,
perhaps.
something like that. I think
Let's take
everyone
it
would be
way back. Let's take it to cave paintings. Let's just take it back.
See, design went all the way back. There were cave paintings. I mean, this isn't a new thing.
This is it. Even the Japanese language itself, like kanji, using symbols to represent complex or to represent groupings of words is really, a root or a base for pictograms. But the other thing that you touched on that I really liked, you said this is a simple design, but actually to get to this level of simplicity is incredibly complex because you're obviously representing things visually. So there are so many different perspectives you can draw a mountain from. Which one do you actually pick? How do you distill that down to a few simple lines? And I think, it's these sorts of things that this showcase is exploring. So it's and things that can then be applied, to our lives beyond design. So Chris, how could, as the host of this show, I want to ask you, how could you
This is the problem when you have two hosts on one show. It all goes completely
how can you
pear-shaped.
apply this to other parts of your life? How can we simplify things? I think these are the bigger questions that this showcase is really asking. It's one thing to present this amazing work, but it's another thing to think about how this can be applied beyond simple graphics.
Well, Grace, you brought up in a specific example of how this is applied to your life otherwise, which was, I mean, can we draw a line sort of from pictograms starting with the Olympics back in Japan to emojis, which Japan also basically developed?
Exactly. A topic very close to my heart. I am pro emojis. I think that sometimes they convey tone in a way that words cannot. So I'm very liberal. I enjoy the process of keeping up with emojis.
It's true, because it's very easy in a text message without an emoji to get the tone wrong or have your tone misinterpreted.
And sometimes all it takes is a little smiley face, and then suddenly it's friendly.
Like, I didn't mean this as a serious thing. There's a little wink there. It's
and I use them in work emails. I'll admit it on air right now. I don't mind. I think it's sweet. I think it's fun.
Do you use it in work emails, Nick? Do you when you write to architects? Do you just
No,
a little wink emoji?
Not really my thing, but I'm not sure what you're implying there. I am a very flirty man, but probably not in a professional context. But I think for me, it's probably quite easy and quite quick to dismiss emojis, but I really don't actually think they're that far removed from what this showcase is really about. It's looking at how we can communicate beyond just words and writing, and I think that's really beautiful.
Just finally, before we go, before you wrap this show, that I will then wrap after you, for whatever reason. I mean, I feel like I can give you the outro here.
No,
if
you
want,
got this.
but that'll be a little
Clearly,
more
you
tricky.
want this. You do it.
A little trickier. This outing of yours did not end with the design exhibition of pictograms at Japan House. You went to a Korean convenience store.
Yeah, it was a fun night out. It went on for a little bit too long, perhaps, maybe till about 11 p.m. But it was worth it. It's a convenience store on High Street.
On a school night?
I know, on a Monday. Not even a school night. Monday night? It's insane.
Monday night. Wow.
We're crazy. We're fun. We're really, we're young.
Design is meant to be lived and experienced, and that was what this excursion was really all about. But maybe quickly paint the picture of this amazing space.
It's on High Street, Kensington. It's a convenience store called Saba, and they have pot noodles. Like, you can sort of help yourself and then put boiling water in. It's a great concept.
So like all you can eat pot noodles? Well, not quite, but you just pick up your own pot noodles.
Well, in theory, you could just keep making pot noodle after pot noodle. But I think maybe to bring this full circle, what I really also enjoyed was Korean convenience store, Korean packaging. It was just an outstanding exercise in really, I don't want to call it in your face, but really intense graphic branding that I think has come to typify Korean design.
Nick, should we combine to close this out? That was Monocle's design editor, Nick Manise, and
our associate editor, Grace Charlton.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. Thank you to you both. This show was produced by Anita Ryota, our researcher was Henry King, and our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.